Yeah, welcome. Then we're going to cover culture or working with different cultures and virtual communications, and kind of put those two things together because, hold on, something strange is happening. We're getting a transcript as we go along. We're going to read a transcript as we go along. Why are we getting a transcript? Stop transcription. There we go. Yeah, we put kind of cultural, working with different cultural teams and virtual communications together because often they're very much related. When we're having to do virtual communications, often then we're working with different cultures around the globe. So these two topics do go really well together. So we'll try and squeeze them into the hour that we have, and we'll jump straight in. So as usual, we have a little klaxoon prepared. Again, it's the same klaxoon as we've been using all along. Let me send you the link. There you go. So if you want to go ahead and jump straight into the klaxoon, we've got a couple of opening questions then before we work through the key approaches and topics. So go ahead, see if you can join the klaxoon. Let me know when you are in and I'll share. As we go. There we go. Give me a shout out when you've managed to get in the klaxoon.
I'm in.
Good, thank you. Person in, can see
Okay.
that. Very good. Everybody in?
No, when I enter my name, it says your name is already used.
You have to use another name because like you've already given that name on another occasion, so it's already got Mina used. So just put like MF or something. It'll let you in.
There you go. Let's use the different.
Okay.
Okay. Sometimes it remembers you if you're still kind of logged in from a previous session. It doesn't always log people out when you exit, and it gets a bit confused.
I was logged in twice apparently because I tried my name and it said already in use, and I tried just J because that's what I used last time, and then it was already in use as well. So.
Remembers. It's a bit.
But we're able to use same names.
There we go. Maybe I'll find a way to fix that before the next session. So great. Thank you very much for jumping in. Then hopefully you can find your way to the middle again where the welcome is. Then just below the welcome, we have a couple of boxes and 2 questions, and we'll start with the first question. If you think about your culture, where you come from, what are the aspects of that culture? So have a quick thing, 2 minutes, throw your post-its in there. What are the kind of cultural aspects or traits or things that resonate with your own culture where you're from? Could be anything in terms of, I know we're very loud, we're very happy, we're, whatever you think of the elements of your culture. Go for it, quick 2 minutes. Throw
Is that
them
in
all
terms of the country or like?
Do
you mean in terms of like the country or like ethnical background or like?
Yeah, from where you're from. So for you, good old English culture or something similar like that. What's the culture for yourself?
Okay.
Very good. Can see them coming in. Excellent. Give it another minute. Good. Give you another 30 seconds, bring them in, and then we'll have that take a quick look. Okay, another 10 seconds, throw some more on there. Let's see what we've got. All right, let's take a look then. Thank you very much for putting those in. Good, we've got some good ones. Very loud and talkative. Yes, tendency not to follow the rules. Coffee and alcohol drinking, meeting friends and business partners in cafe bars, kind of social scene. Patriarchy, religious, judgmental, sarcastic, loud, semi on time for things. I like that one. I like that one. Maybe explain patriarchy. What do you mean a little bit by patriarchy?
Well, it's basically a culture where men have more power than women.
Okay. Yeah.
So men are given, like, they have more authority than women traditionally. And, I think it's very common for this part of Europe. So, yeah.
Yeah, good things to highlight. When you see those down there, what's your reaction to the topics that we've got on the board? Are these challenging for you? Do they prevent us from doing certain things? Do they help us in any ways? What's your reaction when you see these topics?
I know for myself that I had to learn not to be so loud when I talk in social gatherings with people from other countries.
Same as well. Like living in Switzerland, I always get told to shut up on the train. Like if I talk to friends on the train, they always like Swiss people come up to you and they're like, "Shh." It's like, oh. So you just be talking like normal conversation. They'll come up to you and they'll be like, "Shh."
Yeah, and in Serbia, we say about the Swiss, because we know how perfect their country and life is, supposedly, and we say, reality is not Switzerland. So, it's like reality, life is not about perfection, it's actually about imperfection. Imperfection is sometimes more appealing, I think. Yeah.
Good. Any other thoughts?
Well, I know people have asked me, why do we do everything in cafes? Because I guess in some other countries, people don't do everything in cafes, but I guess it's also part of our culture to just do everything over a cup of coffee or a drink or something like that.
Yeah, even closing like deals, like big agreements. It's everything like is done in restaurants and coffee places. You're right.
Sounds good. So the next quick question, moving over to the right then. You mentioned a bit the Swiss culture and things like that. Then what cultures are you working with? What are the aspects of those cultures as well? And you can, think of all kinds of aspects. It could be the Swiss culture, as you've said, you've mentioned perfection and quiet and things like that. You may be working with other cultures like the US. I don't know if you're working with any of the Asia teams. I know some of you are working with German teams, etc. So take a couple of minutes, do the same again. What cultures are you working with and what are the aspects of the cultures? Go for it.
Cool's very on time. German, maybe German. Yeah.
Bernie.
That's, yeah.
So keep them coming. Let's get a few on there so we have a good look. Keep them coming. 30 more seconds. Throw a few more on there.
Yeah, Swiss are boring.
Put it on there.
I think I would go crazy if I lived in Switzerland, honestly. Or maybe be crazier. I don't know.
Let's take a look. We've got Swiss are boring, which are not on there, but judgmental, divided on time. German, very serious on time. Serbian, happy, smiley. American, direct to the point. American, keen to over everything. Hungarian, can procrastinate together. Rules and norms and hierarchies, and just take it easy kind of attitude. Yeah, very good. So when you look at these and you think about the different cultures that you come across, how does that affect the way that you work and the way that you communicate?
I think it depends. Like, it depends on who. Like, if I'm working with, like, for example, this has been recorded, right? So I won't say like company names. There's like, because some clients, like Swiss, how they are, they're very like close-minded in the way it's sort of like they have an opinion, and to them it's fact. And it makes it quite hard sometimes to work with Swiss clients, for example, because there's no real, like, if you can see what they're saying is like not really, I don't know how to say it like diplomatically, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's sort of my way or the highway of the Swiss. It's sort of like they have an opinion, and to them it's right, and they don't really want to hear your opinion.
Yeah. And that means then it's very difficult to change, change then the way that they have set forward, right? Even if you know and have plenty of arguments, say, actually, I appreciate the way that you're viewing that, but it's not the way that we need to go, right?
Yeah, I think I just annoy them as well, because I don't think I'm an argumentative person, but I do say when I think something's wrong or should be different, and they don't really like it. They like that everyone, they like to say their opinion, and they like for everyone to be like, yes, correct. Like,
absolutely. Good. So, some of these things can definitely kind of impede us or stop us moving forward faster. They can slow us down, and they can, cause things to stop. Definitely. Other ways in which it can affect the way that we're working or communicate?
I think it's helpful as well to be like, for example, with us, we're in quite a multicultural team. It's helpful because it means you have to adapt your way of communication to different people, and I think that's helpful in terms of being able to do that is quite a good skill to have and to hone. So I think that's maybe an advantage of having maybe even sometimes difficult communication with people from other areas.
It's a really good point, and we'll come back to that point as well, because there are ways in which we can understand, certain cultures, understand our own views of those cultures, work through that very quickly, so that you can find ways to overcome, the issues that get generated. Or there's a nice way of thinking of it as cultural friction. It's kind of the friction between the different cultures that it creates sometimes. More importantly, you mentioned a really important fact, though, that I wanted to focus on for a minute then is the multicultural teams. We do today work globally, and we will continue to work even more globally in the future. If you can find ways to leverage the multicultural team, the better the results will be. Imagine if you only had one team of Swiss people, but all individually have one clear way of getting stuff done. Now, naturally, stuff is only going to get done in one way, which might not be the best solution. Therefore, being able to leverage a multicultural team genuinely brings better results and better performance in everything that you do. But it's not easy to be able to really, find ways of getting the best out of all of the different cultures and all of the different team members. So good point. Any other points then before we jump into some of the various approaches we can take on this?
Yeah, I remembered I forgot to add, like, for Ghana, African maybe culture, that they are usually very agreeable.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you have to figure out that maybe not everything is, as they say it is, and they are struggling, but you have to kind of figure it out along the way.
Absolutely, and time is different in Africa, right? Swiss, you're on time. In fact, when the first day I worked in Switzerland, we were told in no uncertain terms that you must be on time for meetings, and you have a 4-minute window. You have 3 minutes. You can turn up 3 minutes early and 1 minute late, and that's it. Africa, very different approach. Family is far more important than anything else. It tends to be, certainly in kind of West Africa. So if they have to take their mother to the hospital in the middle of a meeting, they'll get up and they'll go and take their mother to a meeting in the middle, mother to a hospital in the middle of a meeting, right? Time is not so critical. So often you'll wait 15 minutes before they turn up for the meeting. Sometimes it could be a day and they still haven't turned up for the meetings. I've experienced that as well. Yeah. So you can see that there are many different cultural aspects. Last quick question then before we jump into the approaches. Are these different cultural aspects good or bad? And where do the different cultural aspects kind of come from? Why do Germans and Swiss turn up always on time, and in Africa, there's a different perception of the need to be timely, right? So yeah, 2 questions. Is it good or bad? And where do you think these cultures come from?
I think like too much of anything is always bad. Like, for example, I used to work at a place where they were all either Swiss or German, and then I was the first employee in that company that wasn't either Swiss or German, and that was for me horrible because it's like too much of, like, I think like the way they do things, it's good for like for getting stuff done for consulting. I think Swiss and German mentality is probably really good, but then like it's quite disruptive. Then when one person comes in from another culture, it makes it difficult to integrate. But like having something like our company, I think, where there's quite a wide range and there's not really a dominant culture. I think it's quite a good thing to have the variety of different cultures that we can experience.
Yeah, I agree. It's always a good thing rather than a bad.
Yeah, I mean, there can be good aspects of it, and there can be bad aspects of it. Anywhere where it creates some friction and it slows things down and it stops things from getting done, I think that this is where, especially in business, more in business, this is where we have the opportunity then to try and overcome those cultural differences and frictions, so that teams, global teams, can work better together, effectively together, and even then take the more agreeable bits of everyone's cultures then to optimize performance of the team. And why do we have these different cultures? Where do they come from? Why do we have different perceptions of time or narrow-mindedness, openness? Where does that come from?
The history of certain people and cultures, the way we were raised.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very much to do with the way and the environment in which we're raised. A lot of it is down to the way that our parents were raised before us. There is change, of course, over time, and cultures can change. Absolutely. They can change at a country level. We even have company cultures. Different companies have different cultures. And even within a company, depending on where you are and what business you're in within the company, they can have different cultures as well. So cultures take many different forms. A lot of it, our base culture, is very much to do with the way and the environment in which we were raised. And it is deeply rooted. So we can't always change our personal culture. By the time we're scientifically proven, by the time we're kind of 12, 14, in the teenage years, very much our basic culture is fixed individually. It can change over time. And I've actually seen it. I worked in Bulgaria back in the 90s, just after the kind of Russian Union broke apart and Bulgaria was kind of left to work it out for themselves. And I traveled in and out for 4 years, and I was amazed to see how hard everybody that I knew in that country was changing their culture. Even to the point where everybody was trying to learn English. You turn the radio on, you would hear, English songs being played, and then every halfway through the song, they would stop the song and translate it from Bulgarian into English. And, the effort that was going in to change the culture was amazing. And I really saw the culture of the country change over a 4-year period. So culture can change. But it is not easy when working in global teams to identify where the friction comes from, and then, how do you work on that? So let's jump in. I have a few slides to share around how we can really maximize then the kind of cultural bit. It starts with a little bit of the culture and the bias that we have towards culture. So if I say Italians, immediately you'll all have a picture in your mind of the stereotype of Italians, right? And sometimes, the Italians play on their stereotype. They enjoy a little bit aspects of their stereotype, and we'll play to that. The English do very much, will play to a certain stereotype because they enjoy it and they feel that kind of stereotype is a good thing. So we all have our own culture, but we also, as we're growing up and we're raised, we're also built in with certain views of other cultures. Like if I say Indian culture, right, that will also then suddenly you'll have certain stereotypes in mind on how the Indian culture operates. Now, these are very generic, big stereotypes or prejudices that we can what we grow up with. And we can't necessarily immediately change our view of those stereotypes or prejudices because they're really sometimes deeply inbuilt and take time to change. But we can be conscious of them. And if we can turn those kind of unconscious biases into a conscious bias, and recognize that I have a certain view of Italians or a certain view of English or a certain view of Indians or Americans, then at least I can stop for a moment and think, is my thought process on that going to create a friction, or can I at least, you know, back off slightly from my thought of that stereotype and then come at it from a slightly different angle, or come at it from a way that can maximize the benefit of that particular culture, etc. So there are many types of cultural biases, from, you know, prejudice. You know, you mentioned patriarchy, for example, also super strong in India as a culture. The whole patriarchy thing is super strong in India, as is hierarchy, as is caste. The caste system, although they try not to talk about it so much in India anymore, they are trying to play that down. The caste system is still very strong in India. So we have these you know, stereotypes and biases built in. And we also look for the kind of cultures that appeal to us. You know, if you think about your colleagues that you share an affinity with, and certainly when you get into larger teams, you know, who are the people that you know, you've recruited yourself, or you've been able to work with on a team and really choose the people that you're working with. Who are the people that you get on very easily with, that come from a similar background, etc. Naturally, those people tend to form groups. You know, Jamie's mentioned it a few times around Switzerland. You know, naturally in Switzerland, then you get subgroups. There tends to be an English group of people, an American group of people, a Dutch group of people, expats that tend to group together because they all share affinity and they have a certain rapport with each other. But often in global teams, you know, we're not able to do that. However, even if you're working with Indian culture, American culture, Swiss culture, there are some aspects where you can find some commonalities. So often looking for the commonalities can really help. And some of the biases that that can really create some fiction then are things like, you know, perceived negative aspect. Being late in Africa, for example, might be a perceived negative aspect. Visual bias transcends all cultures. Every culture has a certain view on how people should look versus how they should not look. And therefore, you know, how you're dressed can have a massive impact on if people perceive you positively or negatively. It's kind of a crazy bias, and it should not have an effect, especially when it comes to capability and competence, but it does play a big role in business. It plays a huge role in business, which is why, you know, we always turn up for an interview in our best suits, right? Because we want to be perceived positively. Don't turn up in t-shirts and shorts, right? So there are different biases in play, and we can't necessarily change those biases because they've been built up over time, right? You know, they've been built up as we grow up. And here's just an example of, you know, some of the biases in play. One of the practical things you can do in a team, if you've got a new team together, or that you know that you're going to get some frictions working, you know, across German, Indian, Swiss, American teams, one of the good ways that you can approach that without offending anybody is to do a little exercise saying, you know, what are the aspects of the cultures and behaviors that we see, without being rude or hurtful. I think it's really important to respect everybody's culture. You know, it's nobody's fault if they're born in India or in Bratislava or in Switzerland, right? You know, that's where they're brought up. It's just a case of recognizing the different elements of the culture, being okay with that and saying, okay, well, you know, if any of these cultures create cultural aspects create a friction, how can we work with that? How can we bridge the gap between cultures? You mentioned Ghana, and that they always tend to say yes. Very similar in India. They will almost never say no. If you say, can you deliver X, by next Thursday, they'll always say yes. And what they mean by yes is, what they really mean is, I will try my very best to deliver it to you on Thursday. That's their perception of yes. Well, the Swiss have a very different perception of yes. When they say yes, they really mean yes, absolutely, you will get it on time, in full, with no errors. Very different understanding of what yes means. And that will create frictions, and it does. And so, you know, a little exercise around that can help, just by getting the potential frictions out on the table can really help in a respectful way without being rude is always, and that's a bit the skill of facilitating a topic layout. So how can you prevent these biases creating a problem? Well, we've got the biases within us. A lot of it is unconscious. You know, it just pops into a head as soon as I say Americans, they're there immediately. So you can't always eliminate those inbuilt biases. What you can do, though, is interrupt them. And that's the first step. So whenever you're working with different teams, the first thing is to do, go, hold on, I've got a bias, or hold on, a thought has just popped into my head. I'm going to be working with Indian teams. I've immediately got in my imagination how that's going to go. Stop for a second. Really just stop for a second. Take a breath and then express then the expectations in a neutral way. And I've put this to good use myself personally a lot over the last years, also working in Bulgaria, also working in India, places like that. My first thing for India, for example, is to stop for a moment, breathe and go, okay, you've just said yes. What do you mean by yes? Because my expectation of yes is X, X, X. And that already immediately will help the situation and avoid any misinterpretations of expectations. Kind of make sense? So that would be kind of step one out of 3 steps to really try and bridge the differences in culture. So that's step 1. Step 2 to bridging the gap between the cultures and the cultural aspects is the trust equation. Have I presented you the trust equation before? I can't remember.
I don't remember it. Maybe you might have done it in a session I wasn't there for, I don't know.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Yeah, maybe it's the first time I've introduced the trust equation. Okay, trust. So ultimately, working with different cultures, working with different cultural aspects and teams comes a lot down to trust. And very well scientifically proven, 50% of the population will tend to just give you trust up front. The other 50% of the population will say that you have to earn their trust up front. But either way, and of course, it's very easy to break trust. You only have to fail to deliver something once and kind of trust gets broken very easily. Building trust, though, always takes time. It's a classic adage. It can take months to build up trust, but you can break, trust in a day. But there is a genuine simple equation for building trust. First of all, credibility. Are you credible? Plus reliability. So do you deliver what you say? Divided by authenticity, which means authenticity can break the deal very quickly. If somebody's not authentic, you spot it immediately. You can pick up very quickly. If somebody says, yeah, I'll deliver it on Friday, you can very quickly pick up or get a sense if that person's telling you the truth or they're not telling you the truth, right? So authenticity is also a deal breaker in the trust equation. But this is a useful equation because then you can work on those aspects within the team to really start building high levels of trust and overcoming some of the frictions between the cultural aspects. And there's a very simple way to do that in teams, and that's really set the principle of deliver on your promises. If you always deliver on your promises, if you ask everybody else to deliver on their promises, then you can really start to build high-performing teams that trust each other, irrespective of the different cultures and the frictions between the cultures. So deliver on your promises, builds trust, and it's a quick way to build trust as well. Third step to really overcoming cultural differences, and that's feedback. Now, feedback, again, in different cultures is perceived slightly differently. Swiss culture, I've observed very strongly that the Swiss culture really do not like giving feedback. They really try and avoid any kind of conflict, personal conflict, possible. But they will go behind your back and tell everybody else what they think about you, right?
Yep.
But they're not comfortable giving direct feedback. Whereas go to America, they'll give you the feedback directly. No problem.
In Serbia, the same. Yeah.
There you go. But feedback is really important. Feedback is not supposed to be personal. You know, you're not attacking a person. You're trying to give them some constructive feedback to say, okay, you didn't deliver the presentation on time or the piece of work on time. It was critical that you did. It means that we failed on something. Therefore, that's had an impact. And, you know, we need to therefore change the way we go forward to ensure that we don't have the same problem again, right? You know, it's constructive. Feedback is, as they say, feedback is supposed to be a gift. So feedback, in a very professional way, is step number 3 to overcoming, you know, the cultural challenges. So I'll take a quick pause there. Does that make sense? So kind of 3 steps to really work cross-culturally. First of all, just stop for a moment, think about the potential bias that might be in play, and then you set the expectations in a neutral way. The trust equation, deliver on your promise, step 2, and then feedback in a proactive, constructive way. Feedback. These 3 things can significantly help multicultural teams really start to perform better. Make sense? Views, thoughts, reactions?
Yeah, it makes sense. Apart from the trust equation, I don't get so like it's saying the more authentic you are, the less trustworthy you are.
No, the opposite. The less authentic you are, the less trustworthy you are. Does that make sense?
That's what I thought, but like it's on like the bottom of the. So it's like you're dividing by the authenticity. So if you've got a higher authenticity, then your trust is surely lower.
Now you're calculating logically, but yes, kind of. Yeah, it's certainly supposed to be, you know, if you're not authentic, that can break the deal. Think of it like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Other thoughts, reactions?
I think Maya is right that in Serbia we are open to giving feedback and we expect to receive feedback, and sometimes we don't get it. I didn't know that in Switzerland people are reluctant to give feedback, or that's even a stereotype.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually thought that in Switzerland it was the opposite. I thought they were supposed to be really direct. And when I first was working here, I got in trouble for like giving feedback and stuff, like when people weren't delivering stuff, like saying to them, and then they were like, "Were you being rude?" And I was like, I wasn't saying it in a rude way. I was just saying we need this, like next time we need to have this on time, like. And then they were like, "Oh no, you have to take this to the manager, not to me." Blah, blah. It's like, what? To me, that's like being a snake. Like if I go to the manager and say this guy's not done his job, to me that's being a snake. I would go to the person that's not done their job and be like, "Can we do this next time?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
That snake bit is a bit the avoidance of a direct feedback. They'd much rather go behind your back and tell your boss about, you know, something rather than come to you personally and give you that personal feedback. They're fine if you're talking about a certain plan or an implementation in a meeting, for example. They're perfectly fine giving feedback about, I don't think this is the right thing to do, or this is the right plan, or this is the right presentation. That's fine. It's when they're giving you personal feedback that they really tend to avoid that. It's one of the topics actually over the last 5 years I've worked on very heavily with teams here in.
Yeah,
That's interesting, yeah, because I thought that I associate it with Germany. So I think of Swiss and Germans as like very cold, straightforward, business-oriented people. So I always thought that they are straightforward with feedback and personal or business regarding. So that's interesting, yeah.
It is interesting because I noticed as well, the Germans are actually the same. Because I think I mistook directness for giving feedback. I mistook that for something as directness, or at least my own personal definition of directness, it would involve and encompass that. But in Switzerland and Germany, it doesn't seem to, because, for example, in Germany, the same thing would happen. Like, the boss would come in and say something, and everyone's like, yes, all good, all good. The boss would leave the room, and they'd be like, oh, she's they'd be like, she's a bitch, she's done this, like, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing, she's blah 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 blah. And then the boss would come back in, and to her, they'd just be like, oh yeah, all good, yeah.
Yeah, they really don't like the conflict.
Which is weird, because in other things they're direct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I personally I prefer honest, direct feedback. But yeah, I mean, and in Serbia we're very direct and we're very informal. So working in big companies where you have people obviously before Corona, where you had people sitting in one room, and then arguments and swearing and all of this kind of informal language is very, very common. So I think for foreigners it's very difficult to understand and easy for them to get insulted.
And that's a really good example then of where the different cultures then can create frictions, misunderstandings, and then it's difficult to work. So, sometimes when you are working cross-culturally, just being aware and making those kind of unconscious thoughts more conscious, stopping and just thinking for a moment can make a huge difference. And then really kind of using a bit, deliver on your promises, because that kind of transcends all cultures, builds trust, and then finding ways to give the feedback. And sometimes maybe changing the moment and changing the language can genuinely help with that. But without feedback, how does anybody ever know that they need to change, or that they're upsetting somebody, or something that they're doing is just not right in the context? So feedback is super important, even if certain cultures are not so comfortable giving the personal level of feedback. It is really important. At the end of the day, if somebody tells you they don't like something, at least you know where you stand, right? And that's why it's important.
You also sometimes see from the looks of their faces. I don't know what it's like in your region of England, but there's a certain word in English in most of the countries considered the hardest, the worst word you can say, beginning with C. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. In my region where I grew up, it's in terms of endearment. We used it all the time, constantly. I had to stop because when I moved and then was at work and used it, just the entire room just went silent and everyone.
To say. Absolutely. Yeah. And some of that you learn. These things are not often written down, right? There's no handbook you can pick up for Indian culture that will give you the insights of what not to say and what to say. Another little just quick story. So when I first went to Bulgaria, I did not realize that a simple thing of nodding your head is different in Bulgaria. Nobody told me that when I turned up. So it's actually opposite. So when we nod our head up and down, that means yes, right? Well, in Bulgaria, that means no. And it took me weeks to stop nodding my head yes or not doing this, because it's opposite in Bulgaria.
Yeah, and Greece too, Mark, and Greece and Bulgaria. Yeah.
Greece and Bulgaria. So you misinterpret, how they're nodding their head to you. You can get things really badly wrong, which I did when I first arrived.
Especially, I can imagine, because you're quite an expressive person as well. I guess
Exactly.
that
So yes, some of these things you just stumble on and you learn, but as having that in mind, the 3 steps in mind can genuinely help. So I mean, we could talk for weeks just on the cultural topic and get into all of the different cultures, but these 3 steps are definitely very practical and can genuinely help the cultural team, different cultures, work much better together. So very quickly then on communicating virtually, because then how do you communicate virtually with, across the different cultures? Just a couple of minutes as a refresher. We've already covered this before when we talked about communication preferences, but just to keep in mind, again, the intent of your communication then versus the impact. Often it's not the same. You can almost guarantee that there's a certain level of misunderstanding in all of our communications, even more so when the communication is virtually. And of course, different people have different communication preferences. And, throughout all of the topics that we will cover in the coming weeks as well, that communication preference is inbuilt to many other topics, be it leadership that we've touched on, be it, how we plan and get our work done. So this is important to understand. How we communicate, there's the old saying that, we communicate a small amount with our voice, we communicate a huge amount with our body language and our face and our voice tone. And, there have been so many studies on this, and I think generally this is kind of the accepted view of the world, that only 7% of our communication is the words that we say. Only 7% of our communication is the words that we say, which is ridiculously small. The rest is our voice tone and our body language. So if people can't see you, they're missing 50%, half of the kind of communication cue or communication kind of input that they would normally get. So this is why everybody says it's much easier when you're face-to-face and in person than it is when you're virtually. And it's true, it is much easier. And, there's some common issues with virtual communication: misunderstanding, lack of emotions. You don't get to see the face or reactions. It's difficult to bond. Often people are multitasking, when we're doing meetings. I know I do. It's almost, you have to sometimes multitask if you're in back-to-back meetings to get things done, right? So virtual communications are not as naturally as effective as really being face-to-face. And I think, you had a good offsite, and I think you all got to see Jamie's dancing on the body language front of things. So how can you improve virtual communications? Well, there are 2 simple things that can genuinely, immediately improve virtual communications. But anything that improves the visual aspect of communications will help. Anything you can do to make sure that people can see each other, hear each other clearly, and also with the range of tone will help. So anything you can do to make the communication visual will help. 2 simple things that can genuinely help. First of all, communicate with tact. Tact being, think about your stakeholders, comes a bit back to the preferences, adapt your communication a little bit to, ensure that you do take on board other people's preferences of communication and just adapt that a little bit. Communicate with clarity, unity, and pace. So be clear what you want. Try and bring the team together in that communication, and give a clear a time in which you want things to get done. Clarity, unity, pace. And then check for understanding. At the end of every communication, you can say, okay, what did you understand by what I've just communicated? Or you can ask for feedback, brings us back to that feedback point. And, you know, adapting the communication can be as simple as, you know, going back to here is giving them the why are we doing this? What are we doing? How are we going to do it? And who's going to do it? The why, what, and the how, and the who will cover all the different preferences. Building that into your communications can super help. So communicate with tact. Second simple thing is virtual communications are almost all meeting-based communications, and implementing Spacer for all of your meetings can significantly improve the quality of those communications and those meetings. Spacer being safety. I mean, even in virtual times, you can let people know, okay, what happens if they lose connection? Do they dial back in on their mobile phone, for example, so that you can continue the meeting? So safety sounds a bit odd, but it's still an important factor to think about. What's the purpose? What's the agenda, code of conduct, expectations in terms of outcomes? And roles, you know, in terms of, okay, we've got a few people in here. Jamie, could you just keep an eye on the time for us? Let us know when there's 5 minutes to go. Sarah, can you take the meeting minutes? You know, what are the roles in the meeting as well? The amount of meetings I see without an agenda is shocking. Even though that everybody knows an agenda is a good thing to have in a meeting, but very few meeting invites that I personally get to see ever have an agenda in. And it's amazing what happens when you really start the title. And even if it's just a 3-point agenda, it's like I have a standard little 4-point agenda that I put in all of my meetings, which goes something like catch up from previous actions, 2 or 3 topics of the day, and then any other business. You know, it can be as simple as that for an agenda. So 2 very simple things you can implement almost straight away that will improve your virtual communications. Thoughts, reactions, feedback in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, I should probably start putting agendas in I send out a lot of meetings daily because like I meet with a variety of different teams. I don't really put agendas in. I guess it would probably help. Like,
Yeah.
And it can really make a huge difference, especially as many people don't put an agenda in. And as a consultant, especially if you're a consultant, even more so, if you put an agenda in, people will actually tend to try and stick to an agenda. So you become far more efficient in your meetings as well. You know, they tend not to overrun. You tend to get the goal of the meeting completed as well. It's a simple thing, and it only has to be 3 or 4 point agenda. It doesn't have to be a detailed, long agenda.
Yeah, the agenda idea is very good. I always remember it, and then somehow I miss it. So.
Yeah, you know, it's an easy thing to forget, and many people know that it's a good thing. We all kind of know it's a good thing, but you know, often we forget. And you know, if you just have a standard template, you can build those standard little agenda templates into your emails or into your Outlook invites. It's great. So it becomes a good behavior to build, and you get better results for it.
Mm-hmm.
There was an interesting article I read somewhere about how women's voices got deeper during the years, like decades, because of the change in power dynamics. So we speak more deeply than our grandmothers did, and we often do change our pitch when we talk to, do we talk to men or women in our calls?
You know,
Yeah,
I have 2 Russian friends, lady friends, and they said when they moved from Russia to Switzerland, they had to deepen their voices because they, you know, apparently, I don't know it so well, but you know, Russian ladies have kind of a higher pitch voice, and when they came to Switzerland, they really had to lower the tone of their voice in Switzerland. And both of them have told me that. So maybe there's some real good science behind that.
Well, when did they come to? Because Switzerland is really sexist anyway. Like even in like I think it was 1991 was when what canton was it? I think it was Appenzell let for the first time women vote in 1991.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are still many aspects of that. And there's certain cultures that they do not like.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of that. They tend not to publicize it so much, and they try not to talk about it, but it is still very there. And in many cultures, right? You know, you mentioned it, but you know, still very male-dominated culture. You know, these things still exist, and some are very old. And what is nice, though, some of what you might perceive as the very negative cultural aspects in human society have changed hugely in the last 50 years. I mean, you know, some of these changes for the good have genuinely come with globalization of the human race. Yeah, all good. So there is hope for the future, even if there are bumps along the way, right?
Yeah.
Very much, very good. So that's what we wanted to cover today, very briefly, in terms of culture. We all have different culture. Some aspects cause frictions between cultures. The secret in terms of really trying to overcome those cultural differences is to first of all just stop for a moment, turn those unconscious biases into conscious ones, think about the trust equation, deliver on our promises, and then feedback. And then in terms of improving our virtual communications, 2 very easy quick steps: communicate with tact, use the little tact cycle, and implement Spacer. And these things will automatically start to improve your virtual communications as well. So that was it for today. Thank you so much for joining. Great to have you all back in the sessions. And we look forward to next week. I think next week is time management, if I'm right. So we look forward to a bit of time management. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.